Greetings, welcome to Beatles Stuffology. We're two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Bonjour, ça va?
Oui, ça va bien. Et toi?
Moi aussi.
Ah,
Aujourd'hui, nous sommes parlés franglais, as Miles Kingston would have put it many years ago, parce que nous sommes parlé about Michel. How about that as an intro?
that was excellent work, and I think better than my outro at the end of last week's episode of my feeble attempts to speak French. So, yes, that's top-notch work all round there, I think. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah, I'm quite pleased to talk about this one today because it's not necessarily the high point of the Beatles' oeuvre. You see what I did there?
Yeah,
But
very good.
but on the other hand, it still has some points of interest personally, but then also, I suppose, within wider culture as well. Because let's face it, French and France, possibly even more so in the 60s, and 50s, 60s, and then perhaps when we were growing up in the 70s and 80s, has always had a little bit of cultural cachet. And let's just see how many French words we can parlay aujourd'hui.
Didn't you forbid me from speaking French in this podcast at one point?
I don't know. I don't know. Bearing in mind we're on episode, what is it, 90 something or other. There's been a lot of words and I cannot remember them all.
Or any of them.
So this
Good.
is this is a this is an interesting diversion on the album. And before we begin, because I just want to sort of preempt something that you might say, let's remember that this is a song that I think they came up with when perhaps they were struggling to find songs to, shall we say, fill the album, to flesh the album out, that they were revisiting something, a kernel of an idea that McCartney had in the 50s. But then as that kind of song, it's a heck of a lot better than an awful lot of, shall we say, filler album tracks, work songs that the Beatles have produced just a couple of years ago when they were still developing as songwriters.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and it's kind of different in terms of its style. It's definitely not something that we've really come up against before. We certainly had nothing that was a kind of semi-sultry French ballad. We've had things like "Till There Was You," which are kind of, they're not really the same thing, but they're maybe in the same neck of the woods. But yeah, this is kind of new territory. How did you come to the song? What is it to you?
This is where memory potentially plays a trick, because in my mind I associate this with being on holiday in France. Now, I don't know if this is a conflated memory, but the memory I have is of a smallish town, well, I suppose medium-sized town, with a big kind of fishing harbour on the southern coast of Brittany, a place called Concarneau. And Concarneau has on it this kind of like walled island within the harbour that would have been a fortress. And it's a place where tourists kind of flock. Mostly they don't really sort of worry themselves about the main part of Concarneau. The harbour is nice, that's fine, but everyone goes to this walled citadel, if you like. And I have memories of walking inside there and there being people playing. Now, I can sort of, recall looking down on a group of musicians, they're playing some songs, and also in the way that they would have done with the guitar case open, selling their cassettes. And this is where I don't know if I'm conflating memories, because I remember them playing a song called Michelle. Little did I know that it was a Beatles ditty at the time. I think I may have then only realised that years later, listening to the same compilation that I think you're going to talk about. Um, but I remember it being kind of a bit cheesy, a little bit fun, not really the kind of thing I was interested in at that point. And maybe my parents spoke about it and would have said something about it. Um, but this is where it's that conflated memory, because it could also have been panpipes, or it could have been a classical guitarist, playing away on various kind of classical gas type things. Or am I then conflating it with the memories of seeing Don Estelle selling cassettes outside a supermarket in Hailsham, and his really, really bleak years? I mean, I don't think there were anything other than bleak years for Don Estelle after Ain't Half Hot Mum, but in his really, really, really bleak years. But then, is that a conflated memory or something I heard on the Danny Baker show? I don't really remember, but my memory is that I heard it there in France on holiday. But it could just be because it's vaguely French that I think that's where I heard it. I don't know. What's going on? I can't decide. Well, yes, when the legend becomes fat, print the legend. That is one of my favourite films of all time.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Right, okay.
Won't get any disagreement with me. How old would you have been then, do you think, had that been the case?
11, 12, 13, 14, okay. Maybe. So we're talking, early to mid 80s. We kind of stopped going to that part of France after probably around 85, 86, I think. So, yeah, so anywhere from around, I suppose it could have been 81-ish to 84, 85.
Okay. So it's still relatively young for that song to have made an impression that you might have remembered it.
I remembered it. I could just be making it
that's
up
what happened.
Because it's in France and that's a place where I remember hearing musicians play. I don't know.
Fair enough. Well, it's an interesting story, if nothing else, and it's considerably more interesting than the way I came to this song, which is via the A Collection of Oldies But Goldies compilation. That was a cassette that I bought relatively early on in my Beatles fandom, and probably because it was discount, if I'm honest, it would probably cost like $2.99 instead of $5 or something like that. It would have been cheap. And again, we're talking sort of mid 80s here, 84, 85, and it's we've mentioned this compilation I think once or maybe twice before in the podcast. It is kind of an interesting. I'm trying to find the right way of saying this. An interesting historical kind of monument, but without actually being remotely important. And it does have an odd track listing to it. And there's a couple of songs in this. Like, I know this is the first time I ever owned anything which had Yellow Submarine on it. It took me a long time to get used to hearing Yellow Submarine as a Revolver track rather than an Oldies But Goldies track. And, I played this tape a lot. I listened to it a lot in my my Walkman. And, I always trying to hide that war crime of an album cover. And it's really bad. And just, this song didn't really delay me terribly much. But because I just listened to this cassette over and over and over again, I only had a certain number at that point, or you could only, it's awkward carrying more than a few cassettes with you if you were going out and about. So it just got listened to a lot. So it's very much lodged in my memory. It's one of those kind of Beatles songs that I got into early in my fandom, but it also kind of got left behind a little bit. I mean, on that compilation, it's sandwiched in between Help and Yesterday. So I mean, that's not really doing it any favors. Those are both immortal classics for a reason. And like Michelle is a song I've come back to, and I've come to appreciate it more. But for a long time, it was just that one, which was on some dodgy compilation I bought as a teenager.
McDonald suggests that, but thinking about why it was perhaps on that in the first place, McDonald suggests that at one point it was mooted as a potential single, but that Lennon was jealous. I'm not quite sure of what, but and the whole idea got nixed.
You bitch.
I cannot imagine this as a single. But the Oldies But Goldies thing is because I had that, I bought that, I don't know, mid to late 80s maybe. And it wasn't until fairly recently that I realised that it was actually released in December 66.
Yeah, it's an old compilation. It's contemporaneous. It's not recent.
Which then also means you wonder how involved the Beatles were in, say, for example, naming the compilation, because it's got the same kind of attempted humour. As is being used around this kind of era in some Beatles songs. There is a suggestion that Michelle is one of those sort of vaguely comedy songs. Well, Oldies But Goldies, 63 to 66, released in 66. Boom! Funny once, like the B sharps.
Well, quite. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that I don't think they had much to do with the packaging and design and all that stuff. But George Martin did remix the songs for release. They got stereo mixes. There are some stereo mixes that he did for it, and yeah, almost everything on it was just a re-release, except for Bad Boy, which hadn't been released in the UK at that point. That was the lone song that was meant to entice British music fans in to buy this thing. Yeah, thanks for that. That was really going to motivate people. But anyway, I presumably it still worked because the compilation was still in circulation come the mid-'80s and easy to get a hold of since we both managed it. So yeah, presumably this sold and just carried on selling.
Yeah, but it was probably another Beano's purchase for me. It was almost certainly one of those that I'd been looking at in for those who've not heard before, it's secondhand record shop. Beano's used to buy a lot of stuff from, and would probably just sort of pick it up and look at the track listing, and then put it back, and then took months before then actually bought it. And I suspect that I'd forgotten that Bad Boy was on it, and I cannot honestly recall having listened to that other than for when we discussed it. I suspect probably had one of those cassette players at the time that had the counter on, and probably knew exactly at what point it started and what point it ended, and it would be a case of finger on. Okay, yeah, probably did that for Michelle as well, because it's hitting up against some pretty heavyweight songs on there. But yeah, that doesn't get us any closer to Michelle, ma belle.
Well, no, I don't suppose it does. So we should probably talk about the actual song itself now that we've worked our way around it. What do you reckon? Have you reassessed it since those early oldies but goldies days?
No, I would say that it's exactly the same level in my mind now as it was then. It's perfectly nice. There is some interesting harmonies going on. Yeah, you can hear Paul's tongue is in his cheek. That's fine. The French seems reasonably accurate, but then there's the story behind that about taking it to someone who could actually speak French. I think it was a French teacher, or a teacher of French rather than a French teacher, and did a translation. I mean, it's fairly unremarkable. I would say the only properly remarkable bits, as far as I'm concerned, is the kind of the almost baritone guitar that gets played as a little bit of an instrumental break, and then on the fade out. I think apart from that, it's perfectly nice but fairly unremarkable.
I don't think that's an unfair assessment of it. It's not, like I said, back when I had that compilation, it's not a song that delayed me very much, and it's still not a song that really delays me very much. It's not awful. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's kind of drifting a little bit into novelty song. I don't know if that's maybe a bit harsh, but so, when I was saying before, we haven't really come across anything in this style before, and I was going to say we won't really again. It's not technically true. Maybe there's little clips from like You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, which are done in a sort of cod French style or whatever. But there's not an awful lot really to come, which is going to brush up against something similar. And that leaves it feeling a bit isolated, a bit out on its own. And yeah, a little bit of a novelty song.
I wonder if you're better off, rather than going down the Gallic end of things, looking at McCartney's penchant.
Hey.
For
oh god, there's gonna be a lot of this in this episode, isn't there?
For kind of retro styling, as it were. So when I'm 64, for example, those sorts of songs which he likes, even possibly Obly Dee, Obly Bloody Da, or those sorts of songs, Maxwell Silverhammer. And he does have this element of vague theatricality to him, and I think maybe he's falling into that I don't think it's here's one for the parents kind of thing. Still, I don't think they need to do that, because there
No,
is
I
still
definitely agree with
a
that.
poppy element to it. But I think it fits in with um, his interest in being as broad as possible in terms of the range of styles that they present, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because then helps to kind of complement and potentially balance out some of the other things that appear in the Beatles catalogue. So yeah, I don't mind it. You can listen to some albums and sometimes feel they're incredibly one note with a few high points. Um, I am a huge fan of Teenage Fan Club, for example. I would challenge anyone to listen to A Catholic Education, one of the early albums. It may even been their first album, and to come away from it thinking that there's a lot of variety on there. There's light and dark. There's Everything Flows and a few other songs that sound vaguely similar and are quite hard to listen to. Can't say that about a Beatles album, can you? There is variety galore.
Yeah, I think theatricality is an interesting word for it, and a good choice, and variety in both the um, lots of different stuff meaning and variety as in variety theater. I think fits it very well as well. When you were sort of mentioning songs there, the one that immediately came to mind was Your Mother Should Know. You know, that kind of theatricality, that kind of sort of big show tune sort of thing. And Michelle definitely does fit into that sequence. But then also there's the rumor that like maybe they wrote this song so they could pretend to be French and get laid at parties. So
Well,
it can be two things. But yeah, it's fine. I agree with you that musically there's not a huge amount going on here. In fact, it's quite interesting that the majority of the chords in this are really, really straightforward. It's E, A minor, C, D, B seventh. It's all very sort of standard kind of Beatlesy stuff. But using very familiar chords, they've still managed to get something that sounds, I mean, I don't want to say authentically French, but at least carries enough French overtones that like you get what it's going for there. Even if
yeah,
even if it's not necessarily. There's the odd chord, like I think there's a B flat seventh in there, which is slightly unusual. But other than that, there's not much going on in terms of the musicality. But it manages to get that emphasis across. Very much helped, as you mentioned, by that kind of almost baritone guitar solo.
McDonald seems to think that this is predominantly a McCartney solo effort, apart from the harmonies. I'm not quite sure that rings true, to be honest. Have you seen anything that corroborates with that?
I don't think it's particularly true. I know there's the story about, oh, well, actually George Martin wrote the solo and kind of taught George Harrison how to play it. So it's really, if anything, it's a sort of George Martin rather than a Paul McCartney or George Harrison solo. Um, and that feels closer to the truth to me. And I'm not sure if I'm just saying that because obviously I know how gifted George Martin is, and he could easily come up with something which is, oh, well, we need something that's going to give a little bit of Gallic flair to this song. Right, here's your little solo. Fine. I mean, I'm sure he could do that in his sleep. And it's not that I don't think that McCartney is capable of doing that, but they didn't spend an awful lot of time on these recordings, and I'm not sure whether that would have been something that he would have dedicated time to. This isn't a song which was labored over for weeks or whatever. There are songs in this album which considerably more effort has been expended, but Michelle, it's not knocked out, but it's not dragged out either. So the idea that it might be a George Martin solo sounds credible, and particularly I think because it's in that low register. I think if it had been, I think we can almost say without fear of contradiction that it's not George Harrison that came up with it. But I think if it had been McCartney writing a guitar solo, I think it probably would have been in a higher register, or it would have been an actual bass solo. That would have been the bass line. But the bass line, which is it's a really, really good McCartney bass line in this song. But that's, I think, where his focus is. So I mean, it's circumstantial, but that leans me towards believing the George Martin version of events.
It's worth pointing out and there's a couple of things in relation to that. The source for the George Martin um, claim, as it were, as far as I've seen it, comes from a book by John Cruth. It may appear elsewhere, a book called This Bird Has Flown, The Enduring Beauty of Rubber Soul 50 Years On. And I was going to purchase that, but then I saw a really, really terrible review, and then thought, yeah, well, maybe I'll hold on to make it, because there's a lot of Beatles books out there, and I think if we were going to buy them all, yeah, we probably couldn't afford the mortgage. So whether or not that's corroborated elsewhere, but the idea is that he was effectively showing Harrison the notes during the session, and then kind of playing along out of earshot, if you like, of the microphones, if you can be out of earshot of a microphone, but you know what I mean, while Harrison was then playing it. Okay, well, that does suggest that they're in a bit of a rush, which again would be corroborated by what you're saying. They only recorded this on the 3rd of November. But that also comes after a bit of a break from I'm Looking Through You, which they were recording on the 24th of October. Noticeable then that you've got this on the 3rd, on the 4th you've got What Goes On, and 12 bar original before they then take another break. So I don't know if in the meantime they went off and they played a few shows where they just had another holiday. But it does seem like, let's reconvene. We've got some songs. We now need something else. What have we got? Let's put it together. So, I mean, that could suggest that it is McCartney taking the lead and going, okay, well, I've got this old thing. Here we go. And I'll knock it up into something else. But it could also suggest they needed a little bit of help. Either way, here's the non-completist in me saying, I don't really mind. I just happen to think it's one of the highlights of the song.
Well, I definitely agree with that. It is one of the highlights of the song, but also there is a limited range of things to pick from in this song that one could necessarily isolate as a highlight. I'll mention it again, but like the bass line in this song is really good. It's a really good, and I think a very underappreciated McCartney bass line. It's got some. It's just. I'm not going to go into details and sort of explain it all, but it's just really good. Like if you can find like the isolated bass line, or if you really just crank up the bass and listen to it, it's fantastic. It's really good work for McCartney. And yeah, that and the solo are the two kind of standouts in this. It's a decent vocal performance. Yeah. I mean, I think McCartney sings it well, but we know that this is going to sound unkinder than I mean it to, but like we know McCartney can do this kind of stuff. And he does this kind of stuff, and that's fine. Like you said, all those theatrical songs, both before and after this, like that's fine. We know he can turn up and get on with it and sort of do it. It's a good vocal, but it's not outstanding.
Do you think he was leaning into that nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of thing? Oh, look 100%. At me! I know what I'm doing. Look how clever I am. I can be, a little bit French here.
Yeah, definitely. And especially like when he's singing the I need you, I need you, I need you line. Like you can't imagine John Lennon being able to deliver that kind of vocal for it. But there's definitely plenty of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. There's definitely a certain amount of showing off, if that's not too strong. Yeah, I think all of that's in there. And we'll come back to nudge, nudge, wink, wink in a couple of episodes' time when we touch on Girl.
Rephrase
that. No, I really don't.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure that anyone other than Paul could have put the nudge, nudge, wink, wink into this. I don't think at this stage George is capable of the variety of tone, and whenever Lennon gets behind the mic, he's still a bit too kind of earnest, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So the French bit's fine. The fact that it is an accurate translation doesn't really bother me, to be honest. He could have just come up with any garbled nonsense. As long as it sounded Gallic, it would have been perfectly fine. Because actually, it is just the repetition of some of the English lyrics, so it doesn't really matter. It's not like he's sort of espousing some great wisdom in French. But I am intrigued by the choice of name.
Well, yes, Michelle.
Yeah. because when I think of Michelle in French, um, I don't think of it as a female name.
Okay.
I think of Michel Foucault, Michel Gondry, Michel Platini, one of the greatest footballers of, well, one of the greatest French footballers ever, Michel Barnier, the scourge of Brexit, Michel Roux, Jean-Michel Jarre, Jean-Michel Basquiat, or indeed, I'll come to my personal favourite in a moment, but my second favourite, Mont Saint-Michel. You know, it's Michael. Michelle, obviously it's spelt slightly differently without the LE on the end, but whenever I think of Michelle in French, I think of it as a male name. There are many fewer famous French Michelle females, if that sentence works, than males. But my favourite, my personal favourite, is a gentleman called Michel Lotito, who was also known by his stage name of Monsieur Mange Tout.
Oh, yes.
Now, I was not aware of this person at all, but
I'll just before you carry on, I'll tell you that the only reason I know who that is because of Eurotrash.
oh, that makes perfect sense. Okay, fair enough. So
Carry on.
yeah, so Monsieur Mange Tout had a yeah, was famous for eating some very, very, very strange things. He had the ability to digest indigestible objects. And if you are interested, dear listener, in the range of things that he ate, okay, citation needed. But the list of unusual items consumed included, apparently, 45 door hinges, 18 bicycles, 15 shopping carts, I won't do the full list, 6 chandeliers, 2 beds, 1 Cessna 150 light aircraft, and 500 meters of steel chain at once, a coffin with handles, and 1 Guinness Award plaque, which I'm assuming was his own. And yeah, so I say kudos. A picture book based on his life was published in 2016, called How to Eat an Aeroplane. In fact, no, apologies, How to Eat an Airplane. There is a difference. So, kudos to Michel Lotito. And I have to say that is one of the, I can just imagine him turning up on all those French variety programs that end up on French television on a Saturday night. Magnifique, monsieur.
Marvelous. I think this is the kind of information that people who listen to this podcast come for, I should say. But yeah, I know what you mean about the name. It's a curious choice of the name. And I guess the main thing that we have to discuss around the name is whether it was chosen for any particular reason or whether we just think that it's a convenient rhyme for Ma Belle.
It's a convenient rhyme all day long, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, it's got to be.
I don't think there's much debate around the subject.
But pick a name that sounds vaguely French. Well, maybe let's give some credit. Maybe they were aware of the work of Michel Foucault at that stage. I think he would have been writing in the 60s, but even for a pseudo intellectual like Lennon, and McCartney obviously claimed to be in with the in crowd. I'm not quite sure that Foucault's writing would have been exactly the kind of thing that they would have gone for. Yeah, so it's got to be the sound of it, and sound is so important in pop music, isn't it? If you can convey a sense of Frenchness through a name, then that's going to be so effective. But you could have picked almost any name, couldn't you? And there is uk.girlsnamesongs.com, which is my new favourite website, because today I learned that Elvis sang a song called Petunia, the Gardener's Daughter.
That's not a song I've heard, but it's definitely a song I want to hear. What a marvelous name for a song. That's fabulous.
There are so many. You could, anyone you can sort of think of, any girl's name, female name, women's name that you could think of. Guns N' Roses had a song called My Michelle, because I thought I would have a look and see, well, how often has Michelle been mentioned? Not that much. There
Yeah,
is
my Michelle's on Appetite for Destruction, isn't it?
Guns N' Roses can. Anyway, let's not finish that sentence.
Okay.
So we have Fly High Michelle by Enough's Enough on their 1989 debut and also on their 2006 album Greatest Hits number 27. Probably a joke in there. And also in Terry Jack's Season in the Sun, a Michelle is mentioned. Oh boy, and there's a classic. But apart from that, I do realise that this website is not exhaustive. So for Magdalena, for example, it doesn't have the Monkeys' astonishingly brilliant late classic "Me and Magdalena" on it, for example. Under Patricia, it doesn't have Florence and the Machine's song Patricia, which is about Patti Smith, for example. So that's that. You know, it's not complete, but it's pretty good. So any female names you want me to have a check?
Oh, well, you put me in the spot now. I don't know. Prunella.
Prunella. Oh, very good. Okay. It's just there's a Rapunzel, by the way.
Oh, that's good to know.
Um, no Prunella according to this. We go from Priscilla to Prudence to Queenie.
Oh, there we go. Well, I think we probably know where Prudence comes from.
Well, yeah, we could have a possible guess. Yes. Yes. And to make a link to another regular feature of this, of course, when it comes to Prudence, we can talk about Susie and the Banshees, who did do other Beatles covers.
Yes, yes, they did. Yeah, I like their cover of Dear Prudence as
Yeah,
well. I know it's not universally popular, but I really like it.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I haven't looked. I mean, this is one of those really very covered Beatles songs, isn't it? Much like Yesterday, I think it's one of those songs that lots of people feel that they can get their teeth into and make some sort of dent in it. There's a little joke for the French speakers. JG won't know it, but that's okay. Um, yeah. Um, have you been listening to the covers?
I've done a few covers. Yeah, they're all pretty unremarkable. And that sort of makes sense for a song like this because it's very definitive in what it is, I suppose. You know, it's a song done in a French style, with a slightly overemphasized lyric and vocal, and that's kind of it. I listened to the Overlanders version, which they took to number one in the UK. It is grindingly unremarkable. Being as it's almost a carbon copy of the original, except it ends rather than fades out, so it gets slightly slow just at that kind of bit. But that's it. There's a Luther Vandross version, which was news to me, which is bad. It's really cheesy and not in a good way. I think he recorded at the end of the 80s, so it's got lots of sort of tat tacky drums on it and all that kind of stuff. And like, it's Luther Vandross, obviously it's well sung, but it is not a good cover version. And
I
then
read here there's a Booker T and the MGs cover.
yeah, it's what you would expect, I suppose. It's yeah, but it's just not a song that lends itself to a lot of variety. It's difficult to do this song in a way that isn't just doing it straight. Like there's a Sarah Vaughan version of this song, which is done, and it's all that kind of, it's desperately trying to make it sound interesting by not singing the melody on the note. So just bits of it get really stretched out, or bits of it get really and rush through it,
Yeah.
and it's all massively kind of overemphasized or underemphasized. It's the sort of thing Shirley Bassey might have heard and gone, "Oh, take it down a notch, love." It's just not good at all. But it's a desperate. It's obviously an attempt to do. It's a desperate attempt. Maybe that's unfair, but it's an attempt to give it some sort of presence or some sort of emphasis which differentiates it from the original. But all it kind of really ends up doing is sort of proving that they got it right the first time. There's just not a lot of variety in these cover versions.
It's interesting though that there appear to be a few more versions of this that are instrumentals.
Yeah.
So with the Booker T and the MGs and the Ventures and people like that. So yeah, whether or not they are trying to do anything absolutely different, We'll leave it up to your refined taste, dear listener. But what about the Overlanders then? Was that just like a straight version trying to rush out a Beatles song before the album came out so they could get a bit of credibility? Or
I mean, credibility is a big word, but yeah, it's just a cash in. It's just oh, quick, release this song. They're not going to. I think that's pretty much as far as it goes. Exactly the same as Obla Di Obla Da, which the Beatles didn't release as a single, but which Marmalade released as a single, and it went to number one. And the only reason that kind of sticks in my mind is because Marmalade were the first Scottish band ever to get a number one in the UK charts. So yeah, so it's I know in 1968, or was it 16? I mean, White Album 68. But I can't remember if that single was 68 or 69. But yeah, it's that late. It took a long time, and it's just that. Yeah, it's just a quick get it out there. Like we can make capital on this. Not a pun.
I'm now furiously Googling Scottish number one singles. And 40, according to the official charts, as of 7th of April 2023, 48 songs by Scottish artists have hit number one. I mean, even taking into account the population size, that's terrible.
Yeah, it's not a high number.
No. Yeah, and we're including Wet, Wet, Wet and Midure in that. Blimey. God, you are bang on with. Wow, I am shocked and I am stunned.
Well, shocked and stunned.
There you go. Anyway, not that number one is the ultimate arbiter of quality.
Certainly not.
As readers of JG's blog on songs that only got to number two, and the best number twos of each year should be very much aware of.
Thank you for the plug.
That's okay. That is okay. I mentioned that because I was having a look to see if you'd reviewed any programs. It seems like you've really gone to town on Doctor Who recently on that, but let's not start him on that.
Well, only because the series is running at the moment. That's okay. That's the only reason.
Fair enough. Well, I don't think I've got anything else that I want to add on Michelle, other than it's a very pleasant 6 out of 10. Were there any other avenues that you wish to explore?
No avenues, no boulevards, no nothing. No, I think that's
very good.
Yeah. I think that will do us just fine. So I'm also going to give it a 6 out of 10. It's all right.
Yeah. Gets us from there to there. And where, pray tell, is the next there?
Well, the next there we will be exploring is What Goes On, which is something to look forward to. Anyway, but prior to that, you can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are Beatles Stuffology. We are still on Twitter, despite my best efforts, at Beatles_ology, and we're Beatles Stuffology on Instagram.
We did actually post something on Instagram this week to celebrate the fact we've hit 30,000 downloads.
Hey, that's excellent. Thank you for doing that. But that is quite exciting for us.
Of course, we were going to get 30,000 downloads. Bear in mind, we've released 30,000 episodes. So.
Just me checking the uploads went all right. As Andrew mentioned, you can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. I am in the middle of writing about the current season of Doctor Who, which is series 15/2, depending on how you want to number it.
Spoiler, he doesn't like it.
No, it's not good. Anyway, you said you didn't want to start me on this, so you're in dodgy territory now. Right, quick, let's get out of this. But please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. As mentioned, next week we will discover what goes on. But until then, keep listening.